Hi everyone, it's Alyce-Kay Ruckelshaus from Threshold of Hineni, and today we're starting a new series, a really short series, probably about 4 or 5 videos about memorial stones and about building our faith. Most Christians, I think, believe that building their faith is really important, but one of the things that I realized that we don't talk about very often is why it's important to build your faith. And I don't know about you, but for me, if I understand why something's important, I'm much more likely to do it and to believe that it's important. So I wanted to talk about that today, and then we're going to go on in the next few videos to talk about some ways to grow your faith through what I call memorial stones, although they're not usually stones. But they're based on a story in the Bible of memorial stones. And so anyway, one of the things that I wanted to do today, actually the main thing, is to talk about an old hymn of the faith. And so don't tune me out just yet. I know that a lot of you probably aren't fans of hymns. I grew up with hymns, and so they have a really special place in my heart. But I also really love the contemporary worship songs of today. I think that it's important, always important, to have fresh new songs coming out and for people to be expressing that in the language of today. And so I would not want to see just hymns being used, but also contemporary worship as well. But I also don't want us to forget the old hymns of the faith. There's a lot of history there. There are some incredibly profound truths that I think we often don't have brought to mind quite as much as we should these days. And in fact, some of the contemporary Christian artists are rediscovering the hymns, and I'm just really pleased with how they're redoing those, because they also recognize that this is an important part not just of our heritage and of our faith, but these are incredible tools for building our faith and helping us grow in the Lord. So I've been debating whether I should sing this or not, and I'm not going to because you might not appreciate my singing. But you can find the hymn "Trust and Obey" on YouTube. It's all over the place and easy to find, and some of them have the words as well. If not, you can just put "Trust and Obey" lyrics into Google and you'll come up with it. But I've got it posted here on the side of my screen, so you'll see me kind of looking off screen a little bit, because I do have the hymn memorized because I've sung it so many times throughout my life, from the time that I was really little. And then when I was a young mother, I used to sing my kids to sleep by singing hymns for like an hour or two every night. And so these are really part of my heart and part of my life. But you get on camera and you kind of forget everything. It all goes blank. So I try to have a few notes and have things like this up here so that I can see them. Anyway, so the first verse, and we're just going to talk through this hymn and talk about what it means and about why this is important for your faith. And you might actually come to like this song because it will be such a great reminder to you of this principle. And I also want to give a little bit of credit to a friend of mine, Carl Rausch, who actually brought this hymn to my attention as something of a cycle, and how trusting and obeying feed into each other and help us to grow in our faith. So anyway, so here the first verse says, "When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey." And I think, for many of us who grew up with the hymns, and we've heard this so many times, we tend to just sing it and not think about it, which is probably true with contemporary songs as well. So we miss out on a lot of the meaning of that. Well, when we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, that's kind of what we've been talking about for the last few months, that last couple months, since the beginning of January. We've been talking about having devotions and about spending that intimate time with God so that we can get to know him better, and so that we will want to love him more and want to please him more, and so that we can grow in our faith. And of course, that has to be done in the light of his word, because that is the main way that he communicates with us as Christians. And it says, "What a glory he sheds on our way." Well, when we're in his word continually, we see his glory in things. We tend to see what, I cannot remember the name of the couple. Oh dear. Anyway, back in the 80s, there was a couple who, and I'll try to, if I can find something about them, because I haven't heard anything about them in years. I'll try to include it in the details below. But they talked about God's fingerprints. And this became something that was really, really important to me, because looking out for God's fingerprints, in other words, noticing the things that God has done, it's a lot like the book of Esther that we just looked at, where God's in the background. God's never actually mentioned by name in the book of Esther, but he is implied because they prayed, they fasted, and so the implication is that he's behind everything, working it out. Well, the thing is, the fact that God so often is just in the background and we don't have him coming out in all of his power and glory, where we can see him and actually hear his voice or anything like that. I mean, that's 99.999% of the time it's like that. So we look for his fingerprints as evidence of what he's been doing. And just like, you don't normally notice fingerprints all over everything around you unless you're thinking about it. In order to see God's fingerprints, you have to think about it. And he will be glorified, and you'll see his glory in the things that he's doing all around you. Then it goes on to say, while we do his good will, he abides with us still. Whenever we do what God wants us to do, he is with us, helping us to do that. And that's part of this whole process of building your faith, is understanding that God is helping you to do this, that you can't do any of this in your own strength. When he tells you to do something, he's not expecting you to do it alone. He's expecting to go with you. When we were in the book of Esther, we were talking about how the Jewish people fasted and prayed, and Esther fasted and prayed with her maids for 3 days before she went into the king. And that was really, really important, because it was important that she didn't go into the king by herself. She went with God with her. And she was afraid. And yeah, we're often afraid when we do what God calls us to do. But when we obey, he uses that to build our faith. And we're going to see that a lot more in this series. So he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. And then the chorus says, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. And I can tell you that is very true. You will not be completely happy in your faith unless you are trusting God and obeying him. Then the next verse says, not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but his smile quickly drives it away. When we're going through really, really hard times, when we press into the Lord, when we look at his face, and I'm speaking figuratively because we can't actually see him, but when we keep our eyes on Jesus, when we keep our focus, our spiritual eyes on Jesus, the negativity of those bad things falls away, because we know that he's going to work it all out together for good, for his glory and for our good. So it says, but his smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt or a fear, not a sigh nor a tear can abide while we trust and obey. The next verse says, not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but our toil he doth richly repay. Now notice that it doesn't say he doth quickly repay. It says he richly repays it. And we saw that in the book of Esther, because we saw Mordecai saving the king's life by revealing a conspiracy that he found out about, but he wasn't rewarded for it quickly. And that actually ended up to be very, very important. If he had been rewarded then that would not have been available to him when he needed it to save his life. And rather than telling you the whole story right here, you can either go read it in the book of Esther, or you can watch my series on Esther to hear more about it, because I don't want to take up time in this video going into that. But it's a very good example of how God richly repays us, but not necessarily quickly. But his timing is perfect. Not a grief nor a loss, not a frown or a cross, but is blessed if we trust and obey. All these things that we suffer in this life for our obedience are going to be repaid if we trust and obey. They're blessed. But we never can prove the delights of his love until all on the altar we lay. Ugh. Okay, so Romans 12 talks about how we're a living sacrifice, and how we're supposed to present ourselves as a living sacrifice, not as a person who's killed and put on the altar as a sacrifice to God, but as a living sacrifice, that we're we're sacrifices to God in every step of our day, and that's really the way to live for Christ. So he's talking here about until all on the altar we lay, until we take all the things that are near and dear and important to us, and we say, okay, God, these are yours. They're not mine. They are yours. And I'm willing to give them up if that's what you want me to do. I am willing to give those up in order to serve you. And I've had that happen in my life. And there have been some things that probably the very, very most important things to me in my entire life that I've had to give up to God. And he never forces us, but he asks us, and I've given those up to God. And it's taken a couple years, honestly, to get to the place where I'm joyful about that, and where I actually recognize that it's benefited me, that it wasn't just for God that I did that, but he asked those things from me because it would benefit me, and because it's helped me to be able to not have those things taking up my life and my time, and rather being able to focus on what he's calling me to do, which is so fulfilling, because what he's created you to do is the thing that's going to fulfill you the most. So it might be painful at first. It probably will be painful at first, but in the end, it is so wonderful. So we never can prove the delights of his love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor he shows, for the joy he bestows, are for those who will trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet, we will sit at his feet, or will walk by his side in the way, which is what we do when we have our devotions, or when we're just going through our daily life. We're walking beside him when we're aware of his presence with us. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. And that those last lines are really kind of the goal of our faith. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go. When I was in high school, I was at a Christian camp that our youth group went to, and I think it was a denominational thing, if I remember correctly. And the speaker asked us to make a commitment, and only a few of us did, and that was okay, although it was surprising to me. I kind of expected everybody to. It kind of seemed like a no-brainer at the time, but it has made a huge difference in my life. And that was to commit that you would do whatever God tells you to do and go wherever he tells you to go. And so that's been a commitment throughout my life. I mean, I stood up then and I made that commitment, but it's been something that I have wholeheartedly held to throughout my life. Does that mean that I've been perfect? Absolutely not. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've disobeyed God, just like all of us do. But my ultimate desire and my ultimate commitment is to do whatever God tells me to do and go wherever he tells me to go. And it says here, never fear, only trust and obey. Well, I can tell you that as you obey God in the small things, he will give you bigger and bigger and bigger things to do. But you can't do those big things at first because you don't have the faith for them. The way that you build your faith is by obeying God in the small things. When you obey him by walking a little bit out of your comfort zone, and you see that he goes with you, and that everything's okay, and that it turns out great, and that God does something really fantastic because you stepped out of your comfort zone and you obeyed him, that grows your faith. And so then when he asks you to do something a little bit bigger, it's out of your comfort zone again, and it's really hard, but you have the faith to be able to take that step, and he goes with you, and you see that he does something really fantastic through it, and that grows your faith, and so you're able to step out and take another step, and just bigger and bigger and bigger steps. And that's because your faith is growing because you've obeyed. So there's just this cycle that goes on here of trusting God, going out of your comfort zone and obeying him, and that builds your trust in him, so you can trust him for something a little bit bigger, and so on and so forth, until he's doing really mighty things through you. And I have friends who are doing things that I'm sure 20 years ago they couldn't imagine that God was calling them to do. And there are some things that he's asked me to do that I would not have imagined 20 years ago that he would call me to do either. And they're probably not things that anybody else would think are special or anything, but to me, they're way beyond what my comfort zone was. Just doing these videos is beyond what my comfort zone would have been 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, even 2 years ago. And so, you know, each of us has our own comfort threshold, and for some people it's something a lot bigger, and for other people it's something smaller, and that's okay. And that's one of the things that I want to set as kind of a ground rule in this talk about memorial stones, because I'm going to be asking you to share some things. And that's one of those little steps of faith, is being willing to be vulnerable and share some things with those of us who are talking about this. And when you do that, it's going to build your faith. But what I want to, the ground rule that I wanted to set is, it doesn't have to be something big, because we're all at a different place. And what's small for one person is really big for another person. And so just encourage each other as you see people posting these things, and allow me to encourage you that even if you think that it's something that's really small and really dumb, if it takes you out of your comfort zone, it's big enough to share. And I just want to say something a little prophetically here, is that I'm pretty sure God is going to be asking each person who watches this to do something. And it may not be something big, but there's going to be something that you're going to be knowing that God is stirring in your heart to do. And I want to really, really encourage you that now is the time to obey. It's really, really important that you do. It's important for building your faith, but it's also important because when we say no to those things that God calls us to do, it has the opposite effect. Our faith gets smaller and smaller. And I've had that happen too. And I can tell you from experience, that's not a pleasant thing. That's not something that you want to have happen. You want your faith to grow. You want to obey God. You want to have the joy that comes from that. So I really want to encourage you in that. If you're watching this series, you've kind of set yourself up for something really, really good, but something which is probably going to be a little uncomfortable, at least. So anyway, go listen to the hymn on YouTube, because I think that you'll be blessed by that, even if it's not your style of music. I'll try to include a link to the bottom here to the detail section of this post, with some links. If I find a contemporary version of it, I'll include that too, because that might be a little bit easier for some of you. And then also, just as a way of housekeeping, always remember to look down in the details, because I usually include some links that would be really helpful to you, and often some other interesting information that goes along with the video that I didn't have time to share, or I forgot about when I was making the video. And so I think that it's really important to look at that. And then also, if you liked this, please like and share it with somebody, comment below, subscribe. All of those things are things that help YouTube to know that this video should be shared with others and that it should be seen. And so that's just really helpful if you would do that. And anyway, so next time we're going to talk specifically about memorial stones and talk about the background, the biblical background for that, where that's from. And then we'll start talking about how we can apply memorial stones to our lives today, and how that will help you in taking these steps of stepping out of your comfort zone and obeying God. But in the meantime, listen for that still small voice in your heart today. And if you are brave and willing, and brave doesn't mean that you're not afraid, brave just means that you have the courage to do what you're afraid of doing. Please just write that down in the comments below, and I'll be praying for you, and probably other people will be too, and we'll be able to share throughout this series ways that God is helping us to grow, and we'll be able to encourage each other. All right, I love you all. Goodbye.